The first hour of your morning contains the genetic instructions for the rest of your day. That's not just a poetic metaphor, it's a biological reality supported by emerging research in the field of chronobiology. The specific sequence of actions you take immediately after waking doesn't just set your mood or energy levels for the next few hours. It actually triggers distinct gene expression patterns that influence everything from your cognitive performance and stress resilience to your metabolic function and inflammatory responses throughout the entire day ahead. Dr. Sachin Panda, professor at the Salk Institute and one of the world's leading researchers on circadian biology, explains it this way. The transition from sleep to wakefulness represents a critical phase shift that cascades through nearly every biological system. The signals your brain and body receive during this transition essentially program cellular functions for the hours that follow. His lab's groundbreaking research has demonstrated how the timing and composition of morning activities create what he calls temporal instruction sets that regulate thousands of genes affecting core physiological processes. Yet despite this biological reality, most of us have morning routines that evolve through pure happenstance, a chaotic accumulation of reactions to external demands, technological habits, and unconscious patterns, rather than intentional choices aligned with our biology. We've structured these critical morning hours around cultural defaults, workplace expectations, and convenience, rather than around what actually optimizes our neurological, psychological, and physiological functioning. The consequences of this misalignment extend far beyond just feeling rushed or starting the day on the wrong foot. Research from Harvard Medical School has shown that disruptions to optimal circadian priming in the morning correlate with increased inflammatory markers, decreased cognitive flexibility, and altered glucose metabolism, essentially creating a cascade of biological effects that undermine our performance, well-being, and even long-term health. What makes this particularly significant is the amplification effect that occurs with daily repetition. A morning routine isn't a one-time experience, but a ritual repeated hundreds of times each year, creating what neuropsychologists call deep encoding through repetition. That encoding establishes both neural and psychological patterns that extend far beyond the morning hours, ultimately shaping fundamental aspects of how we function across multiple dimensions. The promising flip side of this reality is that relatively small, strategic adjustments to morning patterns can yield disproportionately large impacts on our overall well-being and effectiveness. By understanding the mechanisms through which morning routines influence our biology and psychology, we can transform this often overlooked part of our day from an unconscious default into a powerful lever for positive change. What's particularly fascinating about the science of morning routines is that the timing of activities matters as much as the activities themselves, a principle researchers call temporal organization. The sequence in which you engage in specific behaviors during that first waking hour creates distinct hormonal and neurochemical cascades that significantly influence your subsequent state. Something as simple as whether you immediately check email before or after your first glass of water creates measurably different physiological responses that persist for hours. The power of this temporal organization becomes clear when we examine research from the University of California, which documented how the order of just 4 common morning activities, hydration, movement, natural light exposure, and first food consumption, created significantly different profiles of cortisol, melatonin, and blood glucose when arranged in different sequences. These differences weren't minor fluctuations, but substantial variations that influence both objective performance measures and subjective well-being assessments throughout the day. Before exploring the specific morning routine elements with the greatest transformative potential, we need to address the single most common objection I hear when discussing morning routine optimization. I'm not a morning person. This perspective reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of both chronobiology and the purpose of morning routine design. Optimizing your morning isn't about forcing yourself to wake at 5 a.m. or immediately engaging in high-energy activities if that doesn't align with your chronotype, your genetically influenced tendency toward morningness or eveningness. Rather, effective morning routine design is about working with your biology to create the most supportive transition possible from sleep to wakefulness, regardless of when that transition occurs. Whether you naturally wake at 5:30 a.m. or 9 a.m., the principles remain consistent. It's the sequence of actions immediately following wakefulness that creates the biological cascade influencing everything that follows. The goal isn't to fight your chronotype, but to optimize the transition within it. With that clarification established, let's examine the 5 morning elements that research indicates have the most significant impact on transforming overall life quality and effectiveness. These aren't arbitrary recommendations or productivity hacks, but specific interventions with substantial evidence demonstrating their impact on biological systems that influence our daily experience. The first element with dramatic transformation potential is what chronobiologists call circadian entrainment, the conscious exposure to natural light within the first 10-15 minutes of waking. Research from the Center for Chronobiology at the University of Basel has demonstrated that morning light exposure for as little as 5-10 minutes triggers a precise cascade of hormonal signals that properly calibrates your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates nearly all aspects of your physiology. This calibration doesn't just influence when you'll feel sleepy that night, it impacts your cognitive alertness curves, metabolic function, digestion efficiency, and even emotional regulation systems throughout the day. The mechanism behind this powerful effect involves specialized photoreceptors called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs, in your eyes, which detect the blue light wavelengths in natural morning light and signal the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your brain's master clock, to initiate proper timing rhythms. The practical implementation is simpler than the biology. Spend 5 to 10 minutes outside in natural daylight before engaging with devices or artificial light. If weather or season makes this challenging, position yourself near a window, as even filtered natural light contains sufficient blue wavelengths to trigger the appropriate neural signaling. For those in extreme northern latitudes with limited winter daylight, a 10,000 lux therapy light positioned 24 inches from your face can provide similar benefits. What makes this intervention particularly powerful is its compound effect over time. A study from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that consistent morning light exposure not only improved same-day cognitive performance, but created cumulative benefits to sleep quality, mood stability, and metabolic markers when maintained over just 3 weeks. The researchers describe this as a positive feedback loop, where each day of proper circadian entrainment enhances the benefits of subsequent days. The second transformative element involves strategic hydration, not just consuming water upon waking, but designing the specific timing, temperature, and composition of your first morning fluid intake. Research from the Human Performance Laboratory at the University of Connecticut has documented how overnight dehydration affects cognitive function, creating what they term hydration-dependent cognitive impairment that can persist for hours, even after drinking water later in the day. What's particularly notable is that their research demonstrated a 27% difference in cognitive processing speed and working memory function between subjects who hydrated immediately upon waking versus those who delayed hydration by just 90 minutes. This substantial performance gap wasn't just due to hydration status itself, but to how early morning fluid intake influences subsequent physiological cascades related to alertness, cortisol regulation, and metabolic activation. The most effective implementation involves consuming 16-20 ounces of water, preferably room temperature rather than cold, which can shock the digestive system, before any caffeine or food. For enhanced benefits, the addition of a small amount of mineral salt, approximately 1/4 teaspoon of Himalayan or sea salt, creates what some researchers call a soul solution that improves cellular hydration through optimized electrolyte balance. This approach leverages findings from sports medicine research showing that slight mineralization enhances fluid absorption and retention compared to plain water alone. For those concerned about the taste of salted water, adding a small squeeze of lemon or lime not only improves palatability, but provides an additional benefit. The citric acid stimulates digestive enzymes and liver function, creating what hepatologists refer to as a bile flush effect that supports metabolic activation and detoxification processes that naturally occur during the transition from fasting to feeding states. The third element with remarkable transformative potential involves brief, strategic movement, not necessarily formal exercise, but specific movement patterns designed to activate key physiological systems after the relative immobility of sleep. Research from the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Georgia has demonstrated that even 3 under 5 minutes of movement immediately after waking triggers significant changes in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, respiratory efficiency, and vascular function that persist for 6 to 8 hours. And what's particularly interesting about their findings is that these movement sessions don't need to be intense to be effective. In fact, the research indicated that gentle, full-body movement patterns were more effective at activating optimal morning physiology than intense, localized exercises. The key factor appears to be engaging multiple joint ranges of motion rather than generating significant cardiovascular strain, which can actually create counterproductive stress responses in the early morning hours when cortisol is naturally elevated. The most effective implementation involves what movement scientists call multiplanar mobility sequences. Essentially, gentle movements that take your joints through their full ranges of motion in all 3 planes of movement, forward or backward, side to side, and rotational. Examples include gentle yoga-inspired sequences, Tai Chi movements, or simply intuitive stretching that progressively engages all major joints from your neck to your ankles. The key is consistency rather than intensity. The same 3 to 5 minute sequence performed daily creates substantially more benefit than longer but sporadic morning movement. Dr. Matthew Walker, professor of neuroscience and psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, and one of the world's foremost sleep experts, explains the mechanism behind this effect. During sleep, the interstitial spaces between brain cells expand, allowing for increased clearance of metabolic waste. Morning movement essentially accelerates this clearing process while simultaneously increasing cerebral blood flow, creating an optimal condition for cognitive function. His research has documented up to 14% improvements in cognitive flexibility and creative problem solving among subjects who incorporated brief morning movement compared to sedentary controls. The fourth element with life-changing potential involves what neuroscientists call attentional priming, the careful curation of the first inputs your brain processes after waking. Research from Stanford University's Department of Psychology has demonstrated that the specific content you expose your brain to during the first 20-30 minutes of consciousness creates a template that influences how your attentional systems process information throughout the day. Essentially, your initial mental inputs establish filtering patterns that your brain uses to determine what's relevant and what's background noise in subsequent hours. The practical implications of this research are profound. Beginning your day with social media, news consumption, or email essentially trains your attentional systems to seek novelty, react to perceived threats, and process information in fragmented reactive patterns. Conversely, beginning with activities that require sustained focus on a single input, such as reading physical text, journaling, or meditation, creates attentional templates that favor depth, connection, and purposeful engagement throughout the day. The most effective implementation isn't about adopting any specific morning practice, but about establishing a clear boundary between waking and first digital engagement. Neuroscientist Dr. Amishi Jha, whose research focuses on attention and cognitive control, recommends a minimum 20-minute buffer between waking and any screen-based input. During this buffer period, engaging with a physical book, handwritten journaling, or even silent reflection creates what she calls attentional anchoring, essentially establishing your brain's default attentional patterns for the hours ahead. What makes this particular intervention so powerful is that it doesn't require adding time-consuming practices to your morning. It simply involves resequencing existing elements, moving screen engagement back by just 20 minutes, while prioritizing a single focus activity creates measurable differences in attentional stability, task completion, and perceived overwhelm throughout the day, according to research from the University of California's Center for Digital Wellbeing. The fifth transformative element involves strategic nutritional timing, not just what you eat for breakfast, but when you consume it relative to other morning activities. Research from the Salk Institute's Regulatory Biology Laboratory has documented how the timing of your first caloric intake serves as a powerful metabolic signal that influences everything from energy utilization and hunger patterns to cognitive performance and mood stability throughout the day. Their groundbreaking research on temporal nutrition revealed that delaying the first caloric intake of the day by even 60-90 minutes after waking creates significant improvements in metabolic flexibility, your body's ability to efficiently switch between different energy sources. This improved metabolic function isn't just relevant for weight management, it directly impacts cognitive performance, as brain cells benefit from the enhanced energy efficiency and reduced inflammatory markers associated with optimized metabolism. The most effective implementation doesn't necessarily require extending overnight fasting into significant portions of the morning, which may not be suitable for all chronotypes or health conditions. Rather, it involves establishing a consistent pattern where hydration and movement precede the first caloric intake. For many people, this might mean having water upon waking, engaging in brief movement and other morning activities, and then consuming breakfast 60-90 minutes later. A simple resequencing that creates meaningful metabolic benefits without requiring extreme fasting protocols. Dr. Walter Longo, director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California, explains the mechanism. The transition from sleep to wakefulness already initiates certain metabolic processes. Allowing those processes to continue uninterrupted for a brief period before introducing nutrition allows for optimal gene expression related to energy utilization and cellular maintenance. His research team has documented how this simple timing adjustment improves glucose regulation and reduces inflammatory markers even without changes to dietary composition. I want to speak directly to you watching this video right now. Have you noticed how many of our morning habits were formed not through conscious choice, but through reactions to technology, work demands, and cultural defaults? How the specific sequence of your morning activities was likely never designed with your biological optimization in mind. This isn't about adding elaborate practices that require substantial time commitments. It's about resequencing and refining the activities you already perform to align with your biology rather than work against it. If you're finding value in understanding how these intentional morning adjustments can transform your day, consider subscribing to this channel. Unlike typical productivity content focused on willpower-based habit stacking or aesthetic morning routines for social media, we explore the science-backed approaches that create meaningful shifts in how your mind and body actually function. The comment section below is open for your experiences. Have you noticed differences in your day when adjusting the sequence or components of your morning routine? Your observations might help others connect these important dots in their own daily experience. What makes morning routine optimization particularly powerful as a life transformation tool is what behavioral scientists call the keystone effect, the principle that certain habits have disproportionate influence over multiple domains of life through their downstream consequences. Morning routines represent perhaps the ultimate keystone, as they directly influence your energy, focus, mood, metabolism, stress resilience, and decision quality, factors that collectively shape nearly every aspect of daily experience. This keystone quality becomes especially apparent when we examine the compounding effects of optimized morning routines over time. Research from the Department of Behavioral Science at the University of Chicago tracked individuals who maintained consistent, biologically aligned morning routines for 12 weeks. Documenting improvements not just in the obvious areas of energy and productivity, but in seemingly unrelated domains, including relationship satisfaction, financial decision-making, creative output, and even immune function markers. These wide-ranging benefits stem from what psychologists call resource spillover, when optimization in one area creates additional capacity that enhances functioning in others. By aligning your morning routine with your biology rather than fighting against it, you can serve both cognitive and physiological resources that become available for other life dimensions. This efficiency creates an upward spiral where initial improvements generate additional resources that fuel further positive changes. The implementation of these 5 transformative elements, circadian entrainment through morning light, strategic hydration, brief movement sequences, attentional priming, and optimized nutritional timing, doesn't require dramatic lifestyle overhauls or hours of additional time. In fact, most can be integrated through simple resequencing of activities you're already doing, often without adding more than 5 to 10 minutes to your existing routine. The key is consistency rather than perfection. Research on habit formation from University College London has shown that maintaining a modified routine at 80% consistency creates more substantial benefits than attempting perfect adherence, but achieving it sporadically. This means allowing for flexibility while maintaining the core sequence on most days, an approach that recognizes the reality of modern life, while still harnessing the power of regular practice. For those concerned about the practicality of morning modifications, with early work starts or family responsibilities, it's worth noting that these principles can be scaled to fit within even the most constrained schedules. The research on light exposure, for example, shows significant benefits from even 2 to 3 minutes of natural light. Similarly, the movement sequences can be condensed to as little as 90 seconds, while still activating the key physiological systems. The essential factor is the sequence and presence of these elements, not their duration. Perhaps most importantly, optimizing your morning routine isn't about adopting someone else's ideal schedule or forcing yourself into practices that don't resonate with your preferences and circumstances. The most sustainable approach involves applying these biological principles within the context of your unique situation, your chronotype, responsibilities, living environment, and personal tendencies. The science provides the framework, but the specific implementation should be individualized. As you consider revising your morning routine, begin with this reflection. What currently happens in the first 30 to 60 minutes after you wake? How much of that sequence was consciously designed, and how much evolved through default? Which elements align with the biological principles we've explored, and which might be working against your optimal functioning? This honest assessment provides the foundation for strategic adjustments that respect your reality while enhancing your biology. The transformation potential of an optimized morning routine extends far beyond productivity or energy levels. By aligning this critical daily transition with your biology rather than against it, you're essentially programming enhanced function across multiple life dimensions: cognitive, emotional, physical, and even social. The compound effect of this optimization, repeated over months and years, may represent one of the most accessible yet powerful life improvement strategies available, requiring minimal time investment while yielding benefits that extend throughout every aspect of your experience.